So listen to this. Just last year, Hugo Ekitike was being dragged through the mud, embarrassingly being nicknamed by German newspaper Bild as Mr. Zero Goals, which, don't get me wrong, did make sense. The man hadn't scored one in 464 days. Yet, fast forward to today, and he has just signed for Liverpool for 95 million euros. There had never been a player with 0 national team call-ups being sold for a higher fee than that. Is the most expensive in history. And still, with each passing day, it is looking more and more like a bargain, because I can't lie to you, at first, it was just a huge bet, only meant to be a backup, so much so that they actually went and broke their transfer record, splashing 145 million on Isaac, who's literally supposed to be like a premium version of Ekitke. But now, it is Ekitike who's making Isaac's signing look pointless, and this should be no surprise, because those 464 days were the real exception, the major outlier in his career. This isn't just a player who's finally had a good season. This is a huge talent who was forced to rise from his own ashes after being beaten down and sabotaged by a club who never really cared about him. You see, way before those dark years, Ekitike was already seen as a prodigy. In the words of his first ever coach, Hugo scored so much, Raz got fed up with him embarrassing their teams every time, so one day, they just took him with them. However, despite almost instantly settling himself as one of their top academy prospects, at 16, the club decided to give him a chance at playing for their reserves, and the first problem arose. In the words of the reserves manager, he was a beanstalk. He was always tall, but then he shot up and didn't fill out his frame at all. Then, playing against real men, guys with real athleticism, just watching him, we were scared he'd break a leg every time he went in for a tackle. But well, this patronizing attitude only led him to find out one more thing about Ekitike, his relentless determination. From that moment on, he began hitting the gym harder than ever, and though he had pretty much ghosted all of his first few matches, then he hit 5 goals over the next 7, and as that same coach admitted that, the first games were rough, but then he made it look easy. He was already being given a chance to train with the first team for a week, which, in classic Ekitike fashion, just wasn't enough. As the weekend approached, first team manager David Guillon named his squad for the next match, sending the rest of the players back to train with the reserves, and Ekitike did not like that. Despite his youth and lack of status, he had the nerve to ask to speak to Guillon and outright told him he was making a mistake. As Guillon would recall, he just could not understand why he was not in the squad. That was Hugo. He was impatient with everything. But though that day, Guillon scolded him for not knowing his place, in reality, he'd admit he saw that as a virtue, as unrelenting self-belief. In his own words, that's his big quality. He doesn't moan, slack off or complain. He's very conscious of his qualities and he's frank. He says his piece and then it's back to business. So much that, indeed, he caved in and kept him in the first team. The only problem was that call-up came in March of 2020. Still, one way or another, the next season, with football restarting and his debut coming shortly after, he still wasn't happy. Those patronizing comments about his physique kept bubbling up in his head with every minute spent on a bench, so in January, no matter how much Guillon actually wanted him around, in a true act of desperation, the 18-year-old asked to be loaned out, specifically to Denmark, in one of the most physical leagues in Europe, so he could show everyone that no matter how big the opponent, he wasn't scared of anyone. And though, upon arrival, he was almost sent back before he even stepped out the airport, being refused entry into the country due to the lockdown and only being saved after a high-ranking military officer recognized him as the new signing of the club he supported, Vila BK. Then, after about a month riding the bench, Ekitike was finally given proper game time as they went into the relegation playoffs, scoring 3 and assisting 2 in just 552 minutes of football, which not only allowed him to feel like a professional player for the first time, but almost 5x his market value, putting him in position to reject a place in the reserves after he made it back to Reims, and new manager Oscar Garcia told him he was only their 4th choice striker. And luckily enough, then quickly a wave of injuries sent almost all of his competition into the medical department, which allowed him to sweep up an assist on his first ever start, then a goal in his second, and though after that, he calmed down just enough to start on on the bench against Nantes. Once they found themselves about to settle for a draw, he came in late and scored two in just 6 minutes, a clinical finish and another less so, but from 30 yards out. So now, not even a red card in the following game was enough of an argument to keep him on the bench. In his first match back, he was already scoring again. 2 games later came another, and by the time they played Lyon, though he was actually benched one more time on account of not having enough big game experience, yet again, with the game tied, it was he who came off the bench to score the winner. And before anyone questioned whether or not he should be on the starting 11 against Marseille at the end of the month, he popped up, scoring in the following game and then winning the penalty for the opener and assisting the second to beat Saint-Etienne 2-1, gathering enough steam that by the time Marseille came around, it was opening up the score to put Reims in front at the Velodrome, making himself not only their top scorer for the season, but the top scorer out of every under-20 player across the top 5 leagues, as suddenly talks about his physique became instead about how fast and skilled he was despite his height, with he himself claiming he wouldn't change his body for anything in this world. All of it just in time for the winter market, by which, according to their club president, there wasn't a big club out there who didn't inquire about him, with Newcastle almost beating Bayern, PSG and Dortmund to it, failing to get it done on deadline day, and ultimately ruining their chances of ever getting him, because then, after 2 more goals against Bastia and Bordeaux, even with Ekitke picking up an hamstring injury that left him out for 14 games, spending nearly 3 months after injuries with his recovery, well, he made it back just in time to prove it was nothing but a scare, coming in late in the second to last match of the season to assist the winner, before closing it out with by far the best goal of his career up till that point, meaning he had not only become the youngest player to score 10 goals in Ligue A since 1950, but he had scored almost a quarter of Reims' goals, despite missing a third of the season and barely ever playing the full 90. Yeah, if you remove the penalties, he was still averaging 0.85 goal contributions per 90, meaning that across the whole league, only Mbappe had a better record, so as much as Newcastle tried, there was no chance. PSG came in, and in Ekitike's own words, if you're French, when PSG comes calling, you can't refuse, especially when your loan comes with an option to buy for 35 million euros that would make your transfer the second most expensive ever between 2 French clubs, 2 times higher than any other sale by Reims. Yet, maybe you should have. Arriving in Paris, Ekitike insisted that I'm not scared of anything. When you know what you want, why take things slowly? My football has never let me down. But man, he had Neymar, Mbappe, and Messi alongside him. Sure, the photos must have been nice, but he had to know there was no chance he'd ever be able to shine among those guys. He was barely allowed onto the pitch for the first 3 months, and even once Messi went out with an Achilles injury, allowing the kid to break into the starting 11 and instantly getting an assist before being sent back to the bench the next game and still managing to score and assist another in the 15 minutes he was handed, forcing his way back into the starting 11 and only skipping a game before scoring in 3 in a row. Well, then everyone in that trio became available again, and he was chained to the bench for good. The rest of the season went by almost as if he wasn't even there, and in the end, with Messi and Neymar leaving, as well as a shocking revelation that in reality that option to buy was pretty much mandatory, almost as if their club actually needed that money, the PSG fans dogpiled Ekitike, spamming his Instagram with racist comments the moment deadline day came to an end without the club finding him a new home. I can't ever stress it enough how obvious it was that Ekitike didn't want this. He had already been warned by new manager Luis Enrique that it wasn't in his plans, so then, enabled by the fans' hate, right in pre-season he went as far as sending Ekitike into PSG's bomb squad that is literally known within the club as the Undesirables, and then, just to truly ruin him, Enrique left him out of the Champions League squad. Even Mbappe's younger brother made it into their B list, but Ekitike, well, he wasn't even called up for a single match, Champions League or not, over the next 5 months. So, by the time Eintracht Frankfurt was willing to take him on a loan, even his fitness was completely ruined. Upon arrival, his own teammate Sebastian Rod would admit that he is in really bad condition, only has the power to play for 5 to 10 minutes. I didn't even think that was possible for a 20-year-old. But as much as Ekitike himself tried to act tough, saying he didn't regret anything, that my errors were necessary, it also conceded that even if a striker doesn't score for a couple matches, he'll doubt himself, so imagine how it must feel not playing for 6 months. However, this move to Frankfurt had clear promise. After all, they were the ones that had just built Colomwani into a 95 million euro striker and were halfway through doing the same with Marmoush. But the media wouldn't be so patient. After Ekitike was forced to leave the pitch midway through his debut with a full-body cramp, the sirens were already being sounded, but then one match went after the other, and after 12 had gone by, the German newspapers gave themselves license to kill, nicknaming him Mr. Zero Goals. At this point, despite all I've said, there was actually good reason to doubt whether Frankfurt still had the power to pull the kind of trick they had with Colomwani. After all, only 3 players remained from the 2022 Europa League final, and manager Oliver Glasner had just left as well. Sure, it was oddly encouraging that a new manager was Dino Topmöller, the son of Klaus Topmöller, who took Leverkusen to the 2002 UCL final, as well as the longtime assistant of Julian Nagelsmann, a manager who stood for precisely the kind of football Ekitike would thrive under, but none of that was guaranteed. However, to the distaste of the German media, then Frankfurt decided to once again bet on themselves and bet on Ekitike. With 6 matches left in the season, they informed the striker that despite him being yet to score a goal for the club, they would be triggering his 16 million euro option to buy. And incredibly, that same week, Ekitike put it in between the defender's legs, went around the whole defense and bounced it off the post to put Frankfurt in front. But even worse, it didn't stop. The next game, he glided in between 2 Bayern players before sending it in from outside the box. Then, against Leverkusen, he again got their only goal with a header. A week later, a backheel assist for the equalizer, and in the final game of the season, to make it 6 goal contributions in the 6 games following his proper transfer, another header. Suddenly, Mr. Zero Goals had inflated his numbers so much, it wasn't even far off a goal or assist per 90, and that was before his partnership with Marmoush truly blossomed. By January, with Marmoush by his side, Ekitike looked almost fake. He was dribbling goalkeepers, putting it in between their legs. The sheer confidence he was displaying was out of this world. But well, that partnership also served as a way to downplay him, because to many, it was just a Robin to Marmoush's Batman, since the Egyptian had 33 goal contributions to Ekitike's 18. But once more, timing just served Ekitike perfectly, because that same month, Man City came in and took Marmoush away on a 75 million euro deal, and alone, Ekitike did not falter one bit. Starting right from their last match together, Ekitike went on a run of 4 consecutive games scoring. By March, he was already putting on a man-of-the-match performance to defeat Ajax in the Europa League, even scoring to hold Tottenham to a draw in the following round, and eventually closing out the season by refusing to let go of Frankfurt's best league finish since the first ever edition of the Bundesliga, putting down 6 goal contributions in the final 6 games yet again, and qualifying them for the Champions League for only the 2nd time in their history, the first ever directly through their league finish. Yet, while he prepared himself to follow the same route as Marmoush, insisting that "I'm not in football to be just an ordinary player, I tell myself I can be the best in the world," the man whose market value had now skyrocketed to 75 million found himself in the middle of a transfer market storm. With Newcastle still desperate to undo their mistake, in a lot of ways also looking to replace their star player Alexander Isak, who they must have known was bound to leave eventually, and Frankfurt holding out for a 100 million euro bid for Ekitike, since after all now they had UCL football to play and had already lost one of their star players. Well, the transfer saga got stretched long enough that with Liverpool approaching Newcastle for Isak and getting repeatedly rejected, as they too seem to be holding out for more money, money. Liverpool ended up going for Ekitke instead, hijacking that deal but taking long enough that in the meantime, Isaac, who had become convinced he'd be able to force his way to Liverpool, lost his mind, went on strike, and eventually allowed Liverpool to show the newly rich Newcastle how real sharks move in the transfer market, breaking their all-time record to bring him in as well, no matter how much everyone seemed to think that would make Ekitike the most pointless signing in Premier League history. Except that, while Isaac was on strike, Ekitike gathered enough speed to put down 6 goal contributions in 6 matches for Liverpool, every single one of them absolutely clutch, already being rewarded with his first ever national team call-up. Not to mention, he has put an end to the previous season's claims as, at this point, he'll have Outen Marmoush's numbers for City at any moment. All in all, leading many to question how he could ever bench him after performing like this, and leaving Liverpool with no option but to either bench one of their biggest ever signings or find a way to fit both of them, as well as Salah and Wirtz, into a single starting 11 because, mind you, they also have Chiesa and Cody Gakpo on the bench.